Many miles away, another set of eyes watched the last glimmer of the sky sputter and disappear. The air was cold, as it always was, but Nightmare Moon wouldn't have noticed if not for the wind. Canterlot Castle was always windy, being so high in the mountains. But on the observatory tower, it was especially bad. Thankfully, Nightmare Moon had no need of delicate instruments that may have been swept away. All she needed was a clear view and steady footing. She kept her gaze locked onto where the final star had vanished, already feeling the cloying darkness gathering around her. She knew that if she looked carefully at the shadows on the stone around her cast by her mane, she would see them thickening and rolling, as if waiting for permission to spill outward. With the same sigh she gave every morning, she let her horn light up. She didn't have to raise the dawn. She knew, but she had made a vow. Every morning, from now until forever, she would lower the moon, even if there was no sun to take its place. The light faded from her horn faster than it appeared. The day was eager to take hold over the world, as was only natural, and Nightmare Moon drew in a sharp breath to remind herself that the oppressive feeling was only a feeling. Finally turning around, she found the only structure on the large roof, by memory more than sight. The trapdoor rose an inch above the floor, the only thing to break the level flagstone right up the sheer drop off the edge. And as Nightmare Moon's hoof pushed at a corner, dim light began to spill from the sides. A long stairwell stretched below her. The bottom should have been pitch black, but an infuriating light shone from the cracks of the heavy door. Nightmare Moon let the trapdoor fall shut again, the soft thunk lost in the wind. She instinctively tried to smash the memory down, to put her mind on different things, but she stopped herself. Not here. If it's anywhere I can't run from, it's here. A long stairwell stretched below her. The bottom should have been pitch black, but an infuriating light shone out the crack of the heavy door. A light that Nightmare Moon longed to snuff out. The cacking of her gilded hooves and the stone steps was the only sound as she descended, their pace quickening as she reached the bottom. Her horn sprang to light as she grounded, the heavy door swinging slowly aside. Her eyes narrowed as the door banged against either wall, both from the radiating light and from the voice that greeted her. "Hello, Luna." "That's not my name." Nightmare Moon walked into the room, her mane thrashing behind her. Nightmare Moon blinked, snapping back to reality. Did I just say that out loud? For a moment, Nightmare Moon stared at the trapdoor and listened. She knew she had said that out loud, and she knew who she had heard. She felt her mane shimmer low as she turned around. Out of the darkness of day, a figure emerged from the sky. A Pegasus landed gracefully on the flagstones of the roof, but faltered after a moment, obviously exhausted. "Captain." Nightmare Moon's voice contained no hint of emotion, nor did she move to help the Pegasus as she collapsed. "I came as fast as I could." The captain paused for breath as she fell to her knees. Her wings spread loosely over the ground. You've got to stop Trixie from..." "Shut up." Nightmare Moon stepped forward, bringing her captain into the full light of her mane. Her head was held to the side, too tired from her rushing flight to even lift it fully. Her mask was off, something Nightmare Moon had only seen a handful of times, and her eyes were wide in surprise. For a moment, Nightmare Moon hesitated. There was honest surprise in those eyes, she was sure of it, but it made no difference. "She's been playing me for months," she snarled to herself. "If I can't even trust the look on her face. Trixie is, and Twilight, New Ponyville can be saved." Nightmare Moon looked down, her brow knotting in confusion. The captain's gaze had become unfocused, and as her voice dropped lower, her eyes closed further and further. Within moments she was unconscious, and Nightmare Moon was left with the wind to decide what to do next. Rainbow Dash tucked her wings at her side, giving a silent prayer as she dropped from the sky. Something cracked at her side, erupted in stinging pain, but luck was mostly on her side when she dropped through the canopy of twisted branches. Once she judged herself to be near the ground, she thrust out her wings to slow her fall, and alighted on an exposed root, looking frantically around. "Twilight! Twilight! Can you hear me?" She jumped down from the root and turned in a circle, not sure which way to go. I just saw her. Where did she go? She was right here, wasn't she? Dash picked a direction that she was pretty sure led out of the forest, but she didn't know the truth of the matter. She couldn't even see the hoof in front of her face, never mind a filly several yards away. If she was going to find her friend, it was through frantic yells. Dash pulled up short as she heard a distant yell, cursing her own heartbeat for ringing so loudly as she strained to listen. She wasn't scared, of course, but she was unnerved by the thick blackness around her. She wasn't scared of anything, especially not some harmless lack of light that enveloped her whole body, like a body of water, pouring into her throat as if she was drowning, and filling her lungs with every breath. It wasn't as if she could feel the imperceivable weight lift off her eyes every time she blinked, only to return as she began struggling for sight again. It certainly wasn't as if she knew she had landed next to her friend, only to find her gone and an unfamiliar forest floor beneath her. The yell came again, sounding like it was miles away. Dash forced her breathing to slow as she ran towards it, trying not to think of the innate sky of darkness pushing down on her. She cried out Twilight's name again, bouncing painfully off a tree as she sprinted into its shoulder first. She could recognize her name clearly now, and briefly wondered how much further it could be. Twilight still sounded like she was several hundred yards away, but Dash couldn't have landed more than 20 feet from her. It had to be this weird dark stuff, weighing down even the air, so that sound... For a brief moment, Rainbow Dash thought she heard the sound of hoofbeats before her vision suddenly exploded into brightness. For a detached moment, she wondered where the lights had come from, before her mind registered the pain in her forehead and the sight of the sticky ground on her back. Her ears were ringing as she blinked, trying to clear her head. Another groan echoed hers. Dash's ears perked up in realization of what she had run into. "Twilight, is that you? Rainbow Dash? Are you all right? My head feels all stuffy." Rainbow Dash crawled to her knees and stumbled forwards, feeling the ground with her hooves. She made contact with something soft and slightly furry, and Rainbow Dash threw herself on the object. Sure enough, a quick pat-down revealed that it was Twilight, rolling slowly back onto her back with a continuous groan. "At least I didn't run my face into her horn," Dash grumbled as she rested atop her friend. She sighed with relief as Twilight began to sit up, and sat back onto her flank as she hugged herself with warmth. She shivered as she waited for Twilight to regain her composure, the chill of the open air all too apparent now that they had stopped running. Both mares coughed raggedly as they stood and tried to recover, neither having anything to say. To Rainbow, their situation was obvious. "We almost made it, but almost doesn't count for anything now. We have no idea which direction we were going, and no way to find out. We can't stay here till nightfall." Twilight finished for Dash, her voice making Dash's ears droop. "We don't have very good odds of picking the right way, though, and I can't fly around and check these conditions either." "You're right. New Ponyville won't last throughout the day anyway. But I don't know what to do." Rainbow Dash looked straight ahead, not bothering to turn her head to the voice of her friend. Every direction looked the same anyway, so what was the point? Dash's shoulders drooped as she mentally ticked off her opinions one by one, trying desperately to find a solution. She shook her head, standing and turning to ward off both her hopelessness and the frigid air. On her second turn, however, she froze. I'm not giving up, Rainbow. Let's just pick a direction and hope for the best. It's all we can do." "Actually, it's not." Rainbow squinted her eyes to make sure she hadn't hit her head too hard, but her glimmer of hope stayed with her. Twilight. I think I see a light. Nightmare Moon sat upon her throne, her mane billowing behind her. The room around her was empty, dark, and silent. Windows, both clear and stained, stretched from the floor to the awning ceiling, letting the darkness spill into the room. Any pony walking in wouldn't be able to find their way across the room to the Alicorn, let alone see her. As far as Nightmare Moon was concerned, it was perfect. Nighttime was her domain, and every night she embraced. Whether it was some crop failure or another riot that had to be crushed, every night brought its own challenges and regrets. She had expected resistance at first, of course. These ponies, foals that they were, all thought Celestia had been some kind of saint. Nightmare Moon glared ahead into the darkness, her mind wandering. She had known better, of course, but these foals clung to her like orphaned kittens. Couldn't they see that her night was even more beautiful than day? Didn't they know that every star was another world's sun? That Luna showed them the true scope of the universe every night? It wasn't her fault that they preferred to be blinded by one gaudy sphere that you couldn't even properly look at. Nightmare Moon relaxed her face, catching her anger. She felt the temptation to stomp her hooves, yell as loud as she could, and torch the first pony she found. She examined the impulse from a practiced, detached point of view, examining it like she would a piece of muck that had gotten stuck to her hoof. It was always present. There was always some hatred in her, and she knew she'd never be rid of it. For 1,000 years, it was all she had to live on. Trapped in frozen space, hatred had kept her warm and focused her grief, pain, and jealousy into a single, focused goal. For centuries, it was all she could think about, all she wanted to think about. And finally, when the stars aligned, she had returned to Equestria. Her one single mission for 1,000 years had been completed, but all it had left Luna with was the hatred that had fueled her. The night was her domain, but during the day she had always rested. Even now, with no real day to speak of, Nightmare Moon's guards had orders not to disturb her, except in cases of emergency. She didn't sleep, at least not usually, but it provided her with some time to reel in her thoughts, refocus her energy, and lately, try to calm down. That last part wasn't easy, especially tonight. It had become as much a physical action as a mental one. Every moment of every day, Nightmare Moon could feel waves of heat and tension running over her skin, intensifying as they darkened her mood. She hated. Her hatred had quite literally become a second coat to her, and it always ached to be used. Relaxing had been easier since her return from Trixie, she had found. But she felt a little calmer, a little happier even, after rewarding the unicorn with some small taste of power. But this time, if it hadn't been such a euphoric relief for the Alicorn, she may have worried that she'd overdone it. Through long and hard experience, she had learned that the rage never went away. It only became less violent, but never truly lessened. For the first time since her return from the moon, Nightmare Moon felt like her power had truly decreased, which meant that the hatred that had so long fueled it had to have left. Simple logic drew her into a somewhat troubling conclusion. If her anger never dissipated, but was no longer in her, then it must have gone somewhere else. Nightmare Moon snorted. Fine, let her deal with it. An almost alien feeling of relaxation wafted through her as she closed her eyes, savoring the quiet darkness. A cloud of her mane wafted in front of her face, and she opened her eyes again to admire it. Resembling a cloud more than a flame, its gentle borders shifted slightly as it floated in the air, staying calm enough for Nightmare Moon to see the stars and distant nebula that seemed suspended upon it. Even during her own nights, she rarely had the chance to appreciate the sky anymore, and a wave of depression overtook her as she lamented. She let her head droop, gazing as far down the steps as the darkness would allow her. I never wanted this. I only wanted to show the world how beautiful my night was. When did I lose sight of that? The memories played out in front of Nightmare, like a horror show. Her guts sank lower with each frame. The ponies of Ponyville, when she first appeared, and the terror that emanated from them. Her dodging, or dogging, of those 6 mares as they braved the Everfree, toying with them, while it would have been more merciful and practical to just kill them outright. And then, when the time for death really did arrive, the look on the purple unicorn's face as she brought her full power to bear. Nightmare Moon had seen her own reflection in Twilight's eyes in that moment, and at the time she had relished the feeling. Thinking back now, even she would have described her tentacled mane and twisted grin as the visage of a monster. A clacking noise pulled Nightmare Moon out of her memory, and she choked out a quiet laugh. She was shaking so hard her teeth had been chattering, and she could feel the moisture in her eyes. In the back of her mind, part of her insisted that none of that mattered, that she did what she had to do, and 100 other excuses. That voice was quiet now, and she recognized it as the insistence of her anger. She ignored it and held on to her sorrow, breathing deeply and relishing the feeling. It didn't taste much better than the venom of rage she was used to, but after 1,000 years of cultivating her own poison, even the worst regret was a welcome emotion. Nightmare Moon stood, descending the steps of her throne. The noise was quiet, her glass-like hoof guards barely clinking on the carpet-padded steps. But in the silent room, it was all she could hear. For a few moments, her hoofsteps drowned out her thoughts. But a clear mind continued to elude her, and she knew it would be until she dealt with the problem weighing it down. There would be no relaxation during this day, and the time had come to stop trying to put off her duties. As confusing as the situation was, the captain had to be dealt with. It was almost poetic, Nightmare Moon reflected, that she had hidden her captain away in the same place as her darkest memory. It was her that had originally turned it from a victory into a nightmare. Nightmare Moon realized she had stopped moving a while ago, and absent-mindedly lifted a hoof. The pedestal of her throne sat above her, but here, behind the steps, there was no need for fancy carpets or gaudy ornaments. In fact, the bare wall was simply stone. But as Nightmare Moon pushed a hoof forward, one particular stone slid inward, until there was a click. Immediately, a section of wall just tall enough for Nightmare Moon to duck through opened, swinging outward silently. Bracing herself, Nightmare Moon looked through, the memories rushing up as they always did. A long stairwell stretched below her. The bottom should have been pitch black, but an infuriating light shone out from the cracks of a heavy door. A light that Nightmare Moon longed to snuff out.